The best thing I could have hoped in my local campaign for the privatization or the dissolution of the Romanian state television has happened. The EBU's rejection of TVR's entry at Eurovision. So much win! Now, that doesn't mean that the European Broadcasting Union are the good guys. They're still a bunch of tax-wasting, hard leftist cucks. Now let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Now, while I was in Ukraine, a subscriber and fan of this channel brought to my attention that Romania's entry to the yearly festival of faggotry, the Eurovision, has been banned because TVR is an inefficient institution filled with morons. As a result, Ovidiu Anton will avoid the shame of being broadcasted on one of the most cucked TV stations in the world, Sveriges Television, or SVT. As far as I'm concerned, that's fabulous news. But apparently the Spectator, of all the places, disagrees and believes the ejection of TVR is shameful and fundamentally a bad thing. Now, let's read a bit of their argument, and then I'll explain a thing or two that the English language media has left out from the story. Quote, "On Eurovision night, the best and most heartfelt performances always come from the countries imprisoned behind an iron curtain not so long ago. Since Romania joined the committee of Eurovision in 1994, its entries have always impressed. It has always known that Eurovision is a rare chance for the peoples of Europe and its environs to come together, drink vodka, and laugh with and sometimes at each other's entries. The sheer effort that these tiny countries go to as they show themselves to the world's largest television audience for a non-sporting event is testimony to the awesome soft power of Eurovision. Which is why it is scandalous that the European Broadcasting Union has today rejected Romania, complaining that its government has not paid £11 million of debts. Money is the curse of Eurovision. Britain's awful songs always make the final without having to go through the qualifiers because the BBC gives so much to the EBU. As a result of this musically and morally indefensible arrangement, the BBC can't be bothered to find a decent entry. Pretty much all of ours since the turn of the century have been passive-aggressive insults to an entire continent. The Romanian broadcasters, by contrast, have gone to huge lengths. They laid on an open nationwide contest with televised semi-finals in order to find a winner, Ovidiu Anton. The video is above. Not quite Scandinavian pop standards, to be sure, but they have fielded a singer-songwriter with the courage to stage an entry in 3-4 time when almost every Eurovision entry is 4-4. The showmanship and choreography also beat anything that Britain has laid on for years. The whole song has a rather beautiful Slavic/Gothic theme to it, and it's certainly top 10 material. Lest any Brits feel tempted to laugh at the Romanian entry, let's remember how the votes have gone since 2000, the year that the BBC, which controls UK entries, stopped taking Eurovision seriously. Romania has finished on average 13th, whereas we've finished 19th. And if you count out the total points awarded in the last 16 contests, this is how things stand, and it's 635 for the UK versus 1,168 for Romania. Anyway, and then he goes on. Eurovision ought to be about more than money. If there is one thing that the EU should actually be funding, it's this, because it's about bringing a continent together, rich and poor countries alike, and promoting the ever closer unions of peoples through the medium of television, cabaret, and alcohol. Free trade, cheap flights, and Eurovision is all you really need from Europe. Everything else is bureaucracy, and in the case of the EBU's shameful exclusion of Romania, it's bureaucracy that doesn't even work well. Wow. Wow. The sheer ignorance of this author is astounding. Okay, first things first. It has never been the case of the government paying TVR's debts to the European Broadcasting Union. The government was actually pretty clear 2 months ago that it won't give an extra penny to TVR, and at best, they'll be allowed to declare emergency insolvency in order to avoid being swiftly liquidated by the courts and the market, and maybe, if they're lucky, save their sorry, bankrupt, useless asses several years from now after they go through a long period of austerity. The tiny but vocal group of supporters of this garbage that calls itself a public broadcaster bitched and complained that the government is radical, whereas I think that the government doesn't go far enough. If I were Prime Minister, I would never allow them the protection offered by the insolvency law. That's only for fair businesses who have, at some point in time, been useful for the economy or for the society, which is something that TVE has never been, is not, and will never be, no matter what its supporters say. The numbers speak for themselves, and while politics and rhetoric is debatable, mathematics is not. Secondly, it is simply not true that TVE's entries have always impressed. In fact, Romania impressed exactly twice, in 2005 when the song and the act was indeed unique and innovative, and came in third, just 7 points from winning the competition, and in 2007 when the idea of the song was well thought out and the song itself was very good, but the live performance in the final was absolutely atrocious, which led to the band finishing the 12th or the 13th, if I remember correctly. What I do remember from that edition, the 2007 edition, is our neighbor's song, Molitva, by Maria Serifovic of Serbia, who won the contest for the bloody good reason. But that's all there is to it. Maybe there is also Dida Dragan's performance over 20 years ago, but to say that TVE's entries have always impressed is simply not true. Now, it is true that UK's entries have constantly been sucking for the last 16 years, though I would argue that Bonnie Tyler's 2013 entry for the UK was quite good. But that just because Romania's entries sucked slightly less than UK's entries, that doesn't mean that Romania's entries have always impressed. Yes, TVE's entries have impressed 2 or 3 times in 22 years. That's hardly impressive, methinks. Now, with disingenuous and false claims out of the way, let's get to the core arguments of the spectators, which are really just 2. One, that Eurovision should not be about money, or as the author puts it, Eurovision ought to be about more than money, which in translation means let's ignore basic economics, we have bollocks and feelings to promote. And 2, that EBU's decision is the result of crappy bureaucracy. Now, incidentally, the second argument is absolutely correct, just not for the reasons this author thinks it is. Yes, the European Broadcasting Union's decision is the result of astoundingly rubbish bureaucracy, but that's not a shock. Everything that involves public broadcasters, whether separately as BBC, SVT, TVE, Duna, Mediasol, Galtato, ZDF or RAI, or as unions, such as European Broadcasting Union, everything that involves these parasitic leeches is bound to generate meaningless bureaucracy, nepotism, unprofessional rubbish, and, of course, debt. Because make no mistake, TVE is not the only one in this situation. Most public broadcasters in Europe are in debt, and not just to the European Broadcasting Union. For instance, the Portuguese broadcaster is in an almost identical situation, and if the standards will remain the same, it will probably be the next one in line for ejection, either in the summer for the French Euro 2016 football event, or the Olympics, or at best, the next Eurovision. It just so happened that TVE is hugely unpopular at home these days, and the national government is slightly less impressed by their whining than the previous government, or when compared to the governments of Hungary or Italy. And mind you, I give these examples because the Hungarian and Italian televisions have been in an identical situation, but their appeals to the politicians were a lot more successful, and the Italian and Hungarian Prime Minister were a lot more willing to steal even more from the taxpayers in order to make sure that M1 and Rai Uno, respectively, won't get the treatment that TVE got. Now you tell me, how's that a good thing? Ultimately, if Eurovision is so popular and so great as its hardcore fans, minuscule in numbers mind you, but very vocal, so if Eurovision is so popular as it is claimed it is, then surely it would survive on its own, wouldn't it? If Eurovision is a rare chance for the peoples of Europe and its environs to come together, drink vodka and laugh with and sometimes at each other's entries, as this author claims, then surely such chance is desired by enough people to sustain it out of their own pockets instead of being supported through cash taken by force from every resident of Europe. Right? Because make no mistake, every household in Europe, from Vladivostok to Lisbon, from Tirana to Minsk, and from Yerevan to London, pays for this show. Whereas the total audience of this show reaches roughly 200 million people, that means a bit over a quarter of the populace of Europe. But then again, Australia participated last year, and it is known that at least 10% of those watching it are not living in Europe. And Australia will participate again this year too. In other words, the overwhelming majority of taxpayers in Europe are being robbed at gunpoint to pay for a show that they don't care about at all. And this is particularly true in Romania with TVR, an institution who hasn't reached more than 2% market share with all its stations combined for more than 2 years in a row. So given the numbers, I'm sorry, but TVR's exclusion from Eurovision is not shameful, but it's the best thing that could have ever happened, and hopefully more will follow. Every government should refuse to pay for this garbage, and these tax leeches, the so-called public broadcasters, they should be privatized or disbanded. They're anachronistic institutions whose utility has expired over 20 years ago. It's just that most of them haven't learned this reality yet. But you can't work around basic economics for too long. One way or the other, reality tends to catch up. If the Eurovision Song Contest is so popular and desired, then why not let it stay on its feet on the private scene? Now, I would definitely watch with more enthusiasm a show whose organizers fear for their jobs if they don't satisfy me, the customer. Why not combine Eurovision with a proven successful format like The Voice or X Factor? An X Factor type of show, but with countries. Now that would be entertaining to watch. Anyway. Oh, one last thing. My favorites with this edition are Macedonia and Montenegro. I couldn't believe my eyes and ears how awful are the entries of my usual favorite countries, Poland, Ukraine and Serbia. Especially Serbia. Why send a song in English? That's insane! Whenever you sing in Serbian, it just sounds fabulous. In fact, at least 10 of the 40-odd songs would be significantly improved if they'd be in their native language instead of English. Anyway, with all of that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.